Dave. I'll let you introduce yourself to anybody who doesn't know you. Dave's our CTO, and feel free to take it away.
All right, great. You guys hear me? Good? Yes? Cool. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Jay. I'm Dave Norlin, CTO for Lumifi. Been here almost 9 years and probably another couple weeks, honestly, coming up on it. It's been a great ride here. I've seen the whole spectrum of cybersecurity, especially in modern SOC operations. So one of my first big SOC jobs was working for the Army as a forensics contractor at a huge installation to the south of here at a place called Fort Huachuca. If you know anything about it, there's all kinds of interesting stuff that happens there, but I was in a dark windowless room doing security operations. So that was my start, and then came up here to Phoenix, working for then Data Shield and then now Lumifi. So the whole time, AI has been a part of this conversation and increasingly so. And this is a hard topic, especially at a time like this, right? There's a big sense in the industry that it's kind of impending, it's increasing in capability. The regulation and compliance around AI is not going to catch up to the pace of advance, right? So how do you talk about this? It tends to be kind of a pessimistic or foreboding conversation, and rightfully so, right? It's the unknown. So I liken it to a sea change, right? We've had kind of this calm and an optimistic calm, I would say, in the industry for a long time. But definitely in all sectors of tech, there is kind of this wind of change right now. So I thought I'd start with a bit of humor, and I was told that we have sound here. So who's seen the old Willy Wonka, right? Okay, a lot of folks. I was watching this with my kids, and I saw this, and I thought, this is just unbelievably apt. So it's very quick. This will get us started here. No sound coming through here?
Do you want me to fill in the sound for Baruch Assault?
Okay, well, I'll just narrate this, I guess. I won't be able to voice act as well as he delivers it. But they're trying to find the last 3 golden tickets, right? And he devises a machine that's going to use all these laws of probability. Sound familiar? It's kind of how an LLM works in kind of a weird way. And he's going to ask it a series of questions. It's going to give him a series of responses back. If you've ever seen this, you probably remember. But the computer's kind of ornery with him. It basically says, well, that would be cheating, right? If I give you the answer. And then he says, well, if you tell me, then I'll give you I'll share with you the reward, this lifetime supply of chocolate. So then he tells that to the computer. Computer then says, well, what would I do with a lifetime supply of chocolate? He goes back and says, well, I'll tell you exactly what to do with it, yada, yada. And I watched that with my kids, and I thought, my God, that is just unbelievably apt for where we're at with AI technology. It feels like it's just right there enough to be kind of annoying and ornery and maybe a little bit dangerous and duplicitous at times. So anyway, funny anecdote. If you've seen it, you probably get the idea. Skip through. So I've shown this 3 times and I in different presentations, and I feel like it really is apt, again, for where we're at. I think Ray Kurzweil, at least for a while, was kind of a household name. A lot of people, if you were interested in tech and kind of futurism, you'd heard of him. But he was an MIT graduate who popularized the idea of the technological singularity. I think it's very clear, to me at least, and I think to a lot of other people, that we're definitely on the track, right? He kind of nailed it. He thought it would be right around this time when we would start to have really advancing AI capabilities, kind of the end state being this recursive self-improvement to where you just veer off into this unpredictable zone of technology, right? Machine intelligence being kind of the qualifier, and we're just right there. And I know there's a lot of folks who maybe don't interact with it quite as much, you don't see it. My own personal experience with it, I do a lot of programming on my own in the realm of game development. That's kind of my passion, and graphics rendering and that sort of thing. And it's really good at that. And this is kind of my first big wake-up call that, hey, this is the real deal. It was solving and reasoning through problems, especially in ChatGPT's reasoning models, the O series of models. And I was kind of shocked at some of the things that it was figuring out. So that's when I really started to kind of believe in it. And that was about 6 to 8 months ago, and it's just continued to improve. But I think most people would agree, especially if you're following the space, with my definition of kind of where we're at. We're just really, really close to a model that is, machine intelligent. And in some cases, it's already passing the test to qualify as kind of this, machine intelligence, even if it isn't fully autonomous. Another thing about this, I'm not going to dwell on kind of like the dark future of this. I have one slide that kind of like, it's a necessity, you kind of have to talk about it, but I'm not going to dwell on the sci-fi end of this. I'm going to try to keep it as grounded as I can. But I want to talk about like where we're at in this space. A large part of this conversation, this session, is to educate around where the AI cutting edge is, what that means, and why people are using certain words. And then the latter part is going to be how we kind of reason through this in a more practical manner. But this is the lay of the land, right? From a major technology standpoint, there are so many companies that say, you know, we are an AI native company. The .ai URL, those domains, I love it. You know, suddenly that's a thing, and you can denote that you are an AI company by putting that at the end of your URL. But there are some major players, right? Some are newer than others. Of course, you got Grok, DeepSeek, but some of the larger ones that have been around for a little while, OpenAI, Claude, this logo down here in the corner, lower left, Cursor, if you're familiar with any kind of the vibe coding stuff, which we're going to talk about. And then Salesforce just kind of positions itself to be one of the major like business process AI. And of course, Microsoft, which is really a giant in the space in kind of a latent way. It's being baked into their, I think they even call it Copilot 365, which is just kind of shows you where we're going. So I'll just quick show of hands. Who's like got a favorite? You know, out of all the different AI models, you say, hey, I actually have some work to do. This is the one I'm going to pick. Don't need to say which one it is, but who's got a favorite that you guys use? Okay. So if I'd asked that even a year ago, I probably would have had maybe one or two hands. So it's interesting to see maybe at least 1/3 of the crowd has one that they go to regularly. So why is this feeling like such a moment in AI? What's happened versus the past couple years, and why does it feel like things are escalating? So this is actually an exponential chart, and I'll explain what all this means here shortly. But it's actually a very hard chart to show in an exponential way because the rate of increase is so high. The rate of increase of what, you might ask? It's called context size. So when you're typing with ChatGPT or any LLM, there's a certain window, they call it, of context, and that's background information that it has about whatever the topic is that you're discussing. Maybe it's things you've told it before, things you've uploaded, and with that, it can then create your response through a lot of different ways and tools that it might use. We'll talk about some of that here in a minute. But it's taking all that information and it's saying, okay, I'm feeding it to the LLM, and then here's your response, and here's kind of your natural language way of interacting. This is an exponential increase, and it's not even on a yearly basis. This is getting compressed. And when you talk about the acceleration of things, this is really where some of the rubber meets the road, right? This is your 1,000 foot-pound of torque Lamborghini like hitting the road, and then like every 8 months there's like another 10,000 foot-pounds of torque, right? So you started off with these very early models like context size measured in tokens was like 500 when it started, right? That's nothing today. This is just the GPT, the OpenAI models, and one of the very top ones here that you see at 1 million tokens context is Gemini. So that's Google's model, extremely capable. It's kind of incredible in its own right. But this is just, it's a hockey stick, right? It doesn't even look right if you showed it that way, which is why this chart here, which I pulled from a gentleman who has his own Medium series of articles, he chose to show it in a linear fashion. So that's what's really taking this and turning it into something that feels more alive, reactive, intuitive, and is giving it the ability to reason. It is this context size, and there's ways that this can be manipulated and changed and improved and to get around some of these hard limits, but it is what is pushing things forward in a really dramatic way. So how much, you ask? Well, it's just kind of the elephant in the room. This is going to start affecting some industries, and you can't really have a rational conversation without talking about it a little bit. You've got people who are saying crazy euphoric things about AI and what it can do, and that means they're saying it's going to replace coding. Whether you believe that or not, whether you're a coder or not, that's what they're saying. They would, in theory, be in the position to know because they are the ones who are helping develop these technologies. I love Mark Benioff's quote, the Salesforce CEO, "It will thrill customers out of your mind." I don't know what that looks like, but it sounds exciting. And then, Microsoft and Google are saying that it's writing 30% of their code. Now, they're not being very specific about that. No one really knows what that means. Is it going back and revising old code, or is it net new? There's probably some qualifier in there. I doubt that 30% of all the things that Microsoft released last year were written by their version of ChatGPT, which they in part own. But I do love Mr. Satya Nadella's quote here about this disappearing notion of SaaS. Now, he was on a podcast a few months ago, and he, I think, kind of nailed the coming paradigm here, and you'll see where I'm going with this and why it's important. He said that this era of agentic AI, we're going to unpack this and talk more about it, but that it's going to challenge the notion that these business applications exist. So the sector that they're in, Microsoft, which built its brand really on the business software, right? Applications to make your business run easier. He's saying that this agentic AI is going to kind of pave over that, which is quite a statement, right? If you're in the SaaS industry, you're in the enterprise software industry, like that means something from the guy who runs Microsoft. So business logic as we know it is going to change. You can just see the writing on the wall. You don't quite know how it's going to change. If agentic AI, whatever that means, we'll talk about it. If that's going to be the thing that changes it, maybe. But there's something happening here. There is a sea change, right? So what does all that mean? And I leave you with this. It doesn't mean that. The SaaS market size has continued to increase every single year. I don't believe that that's going to last forever. So there are going to be changes to this kind of tech economy that we've had for a long time, and they may be quite substantial. So I want to talk about agentic. Who's heard the term agentic? Who's heard it like literally everywhere now, right? That's like all we're saying. Before it was GPT or LLM, now it's agentic. And the term agentic, I feel like, is one of the most interestingly twisted and confused and garbled terms. So I kind of poked around and I thought, well, I think I know what agentic means, but do I really know? And it means you have agency. That's what it means. Doesn't mean that it's an agent running on something in the traditional IT sense, like you install it on a computer and now that's your agent. It means it has agency to do a thing, right? It can make its own decisions about something. I love this. Billy was agentic, which is, I'm going to start calling people agentic. I don't know if that's an insult or a compliment, but it means you have the ability to autonomously go out and do something. So I tried thinking of examples of agentic things that are not associated with this AI conversation, because I wanted a good example to explain this. And who's seen Waymo? So maybe a good example, maybe not a good example, depending on how optimistic you are about agentic or agentism, maybe. Then I try to come up with my own definition, and I think, look, this is me coming up with it. I don't know what the Webster definition in the AI era of agentic will be, but I thought it's an autonomous capability, right? That is the key. It is autonomous, that pursues a set of goals within a predefined set of parameters or within the confines of a governing prompt. So let's unpack that a little bit. What does a Waymo do? What's its output? It drives, right? If you were to compare this to an LLM, it would be that it outputs language. But in the case of a Waymo, it drives. It does have some kind of reasoning engine in the sense that it's taking inputs from these things and it's deciding which way the wheel should turn and how fast it should go. And from that, it has to have memory, at least short term, about where it's been and kind of what it was doing in the past. It needs to understand its prior inertia, its momentum, all the different forces in the car, all the sensors that it has, which leads us to the tools. It's got different tools that it can use, notably the sensors. Those are the ones we see, but it's got a lot of other sensors in there and helps pick up on vehicle telemetry and that sort of thing. So it can govern its own action, right? And then it's got this higher order planning, which is kind of abstracted, right? You don't really see it, but it's driven by the app. It's driven by, it's techno overlords right in the kind of Waymo Operations Center. But so there is some higher order planning. So if you kind of go back to what Satya Nadella was saying, if the future is this agentic, autonomous, reasoning type capacity within these business tools that we have, And if those things are going to be talking to each other, then that's a pretty good model. You can imagine a bunch of cars going down the highway. They're all autonomous. They're all talking to one another. They're all collaborating. They're all interactive with one another. And for us, when we start interacting with these AI agents, I think in the very near future they're going to be ubiquitous. A lot of technologies that we currently use today, much like the Office 365 set of products, this agent capability is going to be ubiquitous. It's going to be in every single one of them. I was just at RSA, we're going to talk about that a little bit. But it really is everywhere. Everyone's doubling down on this idea. And in a capacity where you have to go interact with them, they're going to make it as indistinguishable as possible so you will accept the technology. That's the whole idea. And that's not a bad thing. It's not like a conspiratorial thing. It's just that you need to have faith in the thing that you're interacting with, that it can do the job. And in order to do that, it does need to be pretty indistinguishable between a human. So you shouldn't be able to know the difference. Again, I believe that's a good thing if we are truly going to go down this route. You shouldn't say, hey, well, this is an AI and I don't trust this process. If it's going to be successful, you need to trust it, and it needs to be believable. So that kind of leads us down a track of, well, what is intelligence? And I think this is where you kind of get into some territory about the credibility of AI in general. I've heard a lot of good commentary and pushback on AI. You can call them AI skeptics about whether or not this is even useful at all. So what is intelligence? And this guy, also from Microsoft, Chris Bishop, he kind of leads, or did lead one of their AI research centers, and he was on a podcast. A lot of good things come from Microsoft people on podcasts. I'll just read it. He said, when AI models regurgitate information in response to prompts, we call them stochastic parrots, but when humans do it, we give them university degrees. That kind of cuts to the core of things, doesn't it? That's a pretty good observation. And it's true, right? So we've got kind of a dichotomy here. We've got something that basically does the same thing as a human. A human takes all this information and basically loads it into your schema, right? And then you repeat it as knowledge. And that's what we determine knowledge to be. And is that all it's been the entire time? Which leads you to kind of the next evolution of that thought process. If you take it out into the workplace and say, hey, I want to ask an LLM or some kind of AI model to do the same thing as a top quality candidate, but you know 5 to 10% of the time that the LLM or whatever that AI setup, it's going to be wrong 5 to 10% of the time. Do we look at that technology and say, oh, that's unacceptable, that's too high a margin of error, when I bet probably every single person in this room has hallucinated something incorrectly within the past 10 minutes. Maybe not 10 minutes. Maybe some of you are better than that. Myself, for sure. We're always just spouting things that are to our best belief, they're true, but they might not be true, right? And AI is completely sincere if it tells you something that is incorrect, but it maybe was just wrong, right? And that's what humans do. That's actually maybe one of the most human characteristics, is just being wrong about something. So what's the double standard? And will we ever overcome that? I don't really know. All right, so this is my one futurism slide. Because you got to think about it, right? This is the state that we're in. What happens to knowledge when we start using these things, right? It's based on the internet. It's basically effectively ingesting all this information from the internet, which was created by humans. But in the future, if you're not creating things to put out on the internet, you're simply asking an AI, what happens to the generation of that new knowledge? Do we then rely on AI to create it? Do you have this runaway self-improvement? Do you have something that is creating that new knowledge and then keeps doing that to a degree that it's unintelligible to us? Do you have some kind of self-preservation behavior? That's where you kind of get into the sci-fi stuff. I'm going to leave it there because we've all seen plenty of movies, but does it start to form its own motives and then act accordingly and distort the information that it presents to us for some unknown reason that we can't even really imagine? And then, of course, what does that do to the economic situation that we're in? Again, all very sci-fi and futurist type conversation. Would love to have over dinner or over a drink, but I'll leave it there for now. So, RSA. Anybody go to RSA? I know I see a couple faces that I know were at RSA. Okay. This is for folks that haven't been to RSA as well. The AI conversation is prolific, right? You can't go through San Francisco without seeing billboards about AI companies you've never heard of. They had multiple floors. Everybody's got AI just stamped over everything, and it's kind of shocking, right? Like, I don't know how many people can really be in AI. I think we're going to find out, but it's amazing how many companies that have just glommed onto this with good reason, right? Because it conveys a lot of efficiency and speed and probably quality for their deliverables. But it just makes me wonder who's asking for this and what are you guys asking for? So I'm really curious to hear, just a couple ideas from the audience here. Like, what are you guys looking for in an AI tool? Or is that question even too early to ask? Right. That is a great point. Go ahead.
I think understanding how it's made is a big piece.
Mm-hmm.
Much I can say here, but there's companies out there that are claiming that they invented AI.
Mm-hmm.
That's just, there's only probably a couple companies that can potentially make that claim. There's a big difference also, at least when I went to RSA, I always want to meet with product, the head of product at companies. And ones that are using a version of GPT on the back end versus somebody that's using first
Mm-hmm.
or something that is more scaled down with specific focus, almost like what Docker was to the operating system, what Bird is to AI.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these different components that people are using that are not widely understood. And I think that just because you can actually have somebody else's AI come and do something for you doesn't necessarily make it an AI company.
Yeah, yeah. Anything else? Sure.
So, I've been out of RSA. One of the things that came out before that was JP Morgan Chase, the CISO, who emailed a letter to the community saying that, basically kind of 3 warning points inside of their 78% of AI is insecure, deployed in an insecure way,
Mm-hmm.
mainly because of the speed of development.
Right.
Big companies like JP Morgan can't keep up with what's coming out, what's being released.
Right.
How do any other companies do at the scale of limited resources that they have? But then also, the inability for the companies that are deploying it can't fully explain how the AI models they're using, regardless of which one it is actually coming to the decision that it is
Mm-hmm.
in a repeatable fashion.
Yeah.
And so, how do we wrap our heads around that and prove that from a security, from a consistency, and making sure that it fits in, as we even look at more highly regulated industries like finance, healthcare, government, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think even the CEO of Anthropic, who is one of the huge leaders in the space, I think that guy even said, we're not sure how some of these models output the things that they do. And it just goes to show you, ChatGPT and OpenAI, they release updates and then it's like too sycophantic, right? It's too focused on pleasing the user in one update, and then in another update it changes the personality of it. So I think there really is a sense that we're playing with something that we don't fully understand. But that's part of the conversation, right? Is we're just hurtling down this path. And I love your comment. It seems like that some of this is being decided for us, which I think is incredibly apt. And again, kind of contributes to this idea of a sea change, right? There's just something going on with this. And it's kind of hard to define. So I want to switch gears a little bit. I appreciate the comments. Into like, how do we apply this? How do we navigate this space even though we are just blazing down the path regardless? And I'm going to hop around a little bit because I'm trying to condense a lot of AI stuff into a very short window of time. But I'm going to jump around and kind of talk about some of the risks in a more tangible way, just really to educate on things that are out there that you may face as practitioners and decision makers. So this one is shocking to me. Every time I look at it, I feel like it's just breaching the uncanny valley. But it's so pervasive. Even today, you start to see this in YouTube videos more and more often. And guess what? You're going to see it on Zoom calls. I guarantee it. And it is maybe the most dystopian part of this whole presentation. But, potentially interacting with these things that sound real, that are basically real as we would define it on the internet today, right? We see people online, they look real to us and we assume they are real, but they aren't real in some cases. And we're gonna see this in every facet of business, I am sure of it, within the next couple of years, for good and bad reasons, right? People wanna see a face on a call, and maybe that helps with certain scenarios, maybe like in therapy or I don't know, sales or something like that. But of course, it's going to be used maliciously, right? And the scary thing is these avatars can be made from just a few pictures, for one. And now your voice can be replicated after I don't know how many seconds of you speaking. It doesn't take much. The point is, how quickly can you just create the entire board of a major public company, within an afternoon, and have them go up on a fake, very realistic-looking call announcing a change of direction, and then like short that stock or something like that, right? You can just quickly see how this gets spun out of orbit. A very elaborate phishing scenario. So, how do we identify this risk? I actually don't know. This is going to be a major problem for us to solve as security folks. But one of the important things is I think it shows this just rapidly expanding scope of what we are expected to do, as cybersecurity professionals. This is going to be your problem. It's not really your problem in any sense of traditional cybersecurity, but it's going to be your problem. And someone's going to have to figure out a tool, procedure, process, policy, all that stuff to prevent this from happening. And when it does happen, it's going to land in your lap. So I'm trying to educate ahead of time and say, hey, there's going to be something that you got to think about. How do people authenticate on a Teams call? Are you locking Teams meetings, right, to where random people can't join? What's your Teams or Zoom link sharing security policy? Is that just posted online somewhere to where someone with a permanent invite, right? I know those used to exist with Zoom for sure, because we had, accidentally people joining into the wrong call, from other entities. Are those posted online? The hygiene around some of these video conferencing technologies, it's gonna have to really be improved. All right, vibe coding, who's done it? Who's guilty? Yeah, okay, probably more than want to admit. If you're not familiar with vibe coding, there are all kinds of tools. Cursor is a huge one out there. They basically will take natural language prompt and then generate the application, or they'll try to anyway, that you're asking for. So you'll say, hey, build me a calorie counting app. And then it will go through and take all of those requirements back to a specialized model that will then generate that app, and sometimes in totality, depending on how complex it is. And if you remember back to that context window size conversation I had, that window is ballooning out, right? So the level of completeness and complexity of these applications that these types of vibe coding tools or AI coding tools are generating is going to continue to increase to where people are going to be asking it for more and more elaborate things like, hey, build me a new server OS or something like that, right? Build me some kind of new business application. So the things that are coming out of these tools, I think, is going to shock people in the next few years. Who's looking at that code? These things are not great at doing QA on their own code. So how quickly are decision makers going from save money, code it with AI, release to production? Probably those conversations are happening right now. And guess whose lap that falls into when it gets breached? Yours. So who's got access to those tools? Do they know how those work? Do they know how that code is vetted and tested? Is it part of the actual CI/CD pipeline? Is it being tested for secure coding practices? We don't know. And the industry, I'm sure, was racing to try to solve those problems, but you can also imagine that these tools, that oftentimes they are open source and freely available. Why wouldn't you just use those to develop malware, right? And you don't even need to be a malware engineer or some kind of elite hacker to do this. You just ask a specialized model, which those will surely be released online, to go do it for you, and then now this proliferates over and over again. All right, so let's say you've gone through all the hoops of actually building a good AI process. policy and procedure, and now you've got some kind of AI-driven tool that's out there in the market. Just like we have poisoning of all kinds today of data, this is something that's starting to show up in the academic space, is an acknowledgement and realization that these models, even if they are relatively static, because they now incorporate memory and some other input parameters from users, they can actually be poisoned. And this is really scary in ways that you would, of course, imagine if you think about it for 5 minutes. If you have, let's say, something that is used for medical purposes, and you want to interact with that and change the input parameters, and you want to consistently give it negative feedback about certain things and change the diagnoses that it creates, you can now do that, apparently, with some of these medical-based LLM models. And there's a lot of folks writing papers on this, so there's awareness of it. But again, if you're like in the medical arena, you got to ask, like, who and from whom and how did we vet these models? Did people actually look at this? How can they be interacted with? Are they truly static? That's a question. Again, a couple other academic papers. One that is quite terrifying. Folks use these a lot to look at like radiology images, I guess. Because that was one of the very first use cases where people realized, hey, these LLMs are really good at looking for anomalies. In this case, for breast cancer, it turns out those models can be poisoned and taught to give an incorrect answer. And then this is the one that's probably on most people's minds when they first think about this is, can you red team a model to just give it something malicious? And turns out it looks like you can. All right, let's get a little sillier and crazier with this. When ChatGPT first released their big image modification update, this is probably 3 or 4 months ago, when all of a sudden the Ghibli images appeared, someone was like, hey, why don't I just try to commit insurance fraud with this? And apparently that works, which is just such a devious and brilliant use case. I can't believe I'm admitting that, but these kinds of things that we have relied on for years, which you could just take a picture of something and our assumed belief is that that is real, that's changing. So how does that affect the insurance agencies? How does that affect all of these companies that have relied on the efficiency of just receiving an image to corroborate something? Now, you can go artificially scuff up your BMW, apparently, send that into your Geico, and the only way they can defend against that is by physically sending someone out to your vehicle, like the old school days, and then now validating, yes, your BMW has a scuff on it, or no, you are defrauding the company. And then, of course, I think when I put this together, this gentleman was still alive. But if you were to create something of a public figure and kind of manipulate reality, kind of like I talked about with the board scenario, the definition of reality, again, that's going to fall to you guys. For your organizations, you're going to have to define what is the acceptable reality and try to defend it, and that's going to become harder and harder. All right, let's talk about malware. This is where everybody's head typically gravitates to. And my take on this is that it's going to be the same as it has been, but it's going to be all of the attributes that you've associated with malware just cranked up to 11. So it's going to be more polymorphic, it's going to be more obfuscated, it will be more novel, and it will be much more available to access. So I did a little experiment. I just said, give me AI-coded malware. And there is a Google preferred link that takes you to a Medium article. I just decided to remove the guy's name off this because I almost felt bad, kind of putting him on blast. But he just says, here's how you go create malware, like a remote access Trojan, using Cursor. I was like, that seems bad. I don't know if that needs to be out there, but the information is going to proliferate, right? No matter how hard you try to keep it under wraps. So folks that have no technical background in malware coding, maybe not even in coding in general, they're going to start doing this, and the variation and the number of threats is just going to balloon like technology always does, right? It's going to continue to escalate. So what do you do about this? The only thing I think you can do about this in a reasonable way is start to interact with it. I encourage everybody to find their little technical niche, especially if you're in cybersecurity, whether you're even in coding or malware reverse engineering or just like some kind of basic technical aptitude, like, hey, write me a PowerShell script for something that I do all the time. You guys have to interact with this, because if you don't, then you're going to have a harder time understanding the capabilities and how quickly they're advancing. And if you have some kind of continued project that will allow you to keep interacting with it as there are new advances, then you'll understand those first, and you can help explain that to your decision makers. And then also take it another step further. Once you understand it, you need to get your decision makers to understand it. You need to get folks in your organization to understand it. And the only way you do that is by helping facilitate the onboarding of some kind of AI tool. There is no avoiding this anymore. You have to find a way for folks to interact with it so you can proactively and in a positive way kind of identify things before someone in a back office just brewing up something nasty with their own AI stuff. Try to give them a route before they take matters into their own hands. A couple other anecdotes here that I want to leave you with. So I was thinking about this. How do we talk about a knowledge worker and this idea that we're going to replace them, right? That is just so part and parcel a part of this conversation, right? Where people are going to get replaced, yada, yada. Well, you got to reason through that. And I think thinking of it in terms of a knowledge worker versus a knowledge amplifier is a really useful kind of dichotomy. And it allows you to kind of put risk into two buckets. So we'll start with knowledge worker, right? What are the assumptions of a knowledge worker? Well, is that AI going to operate at a level that we see as indistinguishable from a human? All right, that's kind of, to me, the definition. Can it autonomously, is it agentic, can it agentically perform tasks? Do you need to moderate it and help it all the time? Like you don't have to with a human, at least maybe in some cases you do, but ideally you don't have to do that with a human. And is the work output identical? If it is, then maybe it is truly a knowledge worker, but I don't see many, if any, examples of that just yet. Versus a knowledge amplifier. So it boosts your knowledge if you really use these kind of LLMs on a technical basis for these kinds of things. It does feel like a superpower at times, right? It feels like I have 50 extra points of IQ and I can just solve problems and then I can ask it to teach me how it did that. That's like the positive way I see AI working out. It improves the quality of human output and it accelerates productivity. Those are good things, and that's why they're amplifiers. However, there are risks associated with both. But in the case of a worker, you have the potential for these agentic mishaps, right? And they're not accountable because they're not human, right? You can go fire it, but that doesn't mean that you've resolved the core issue or that you can create areas for improvement. Like you're just getting rid of another, CPU process somewhere. So it's lessened accountability for that process, but it means there's more accountability for the organization writ large, right? So it's concentrated risk when you start to assume these knowledge workers are doing things on their own autonomously versus a knowledge amplifier. There's much less risk, right? There's just inherently less risk with giving a tool to someone to help improve their ability. And it's potentially more auditable, right? You can say, hey, well, where did you get this from? You can ask a human, where did that come from? And it will at least tell you most of the time. Yeah, I got it from AI, or I used this to help me figure it out. So there's two paths, right? That's how I see it, knowledge workers versus amplifiers. And then additionally, I think a lot of people probably saw the Salesforce ad during the Super Bowl. I thought that was such an interesting and bizarre way to present AI. It felt like they had created a problem for their solution. And I think it's a good metaphor. It's probably not what they intended, but it's a good metaphor for how we should think about AI in our own organizations. Is this a solution in search of a problem? What is this actually solving? The crux of the issue for Matthew McConaughey was that he was literally on the wrong side of the street. He was getting rained on over there. He could have just gotten up and walked over to the other side, maybe before he even started to get rained on, and joined Woody Harrelson. But the Salesforce pitch was that he needed AI to do that, which, if you kind of take a step back, that's probably how a lot of these conversations are going in some of these organizations, saying, well, this is our solution to a problem that really could be solved by other means. So think about that, right? Is this something that could only be solved by AI, and is it mature enough to actually do that? In many cases, at least right now, the answer might probably still be no. Of course, it is changing, but make sure that you got the right tool for the job. And then the last thing is, this is coming. It's going to be ubiquitous. It's everywhere. I mean, literally every person in this room has this on their phone because basically every provider of technology these days, especially in whether you're on Android or Google, or excuse me, Android or Apple, you got it now. Gemini, it's everywhere. So everybody in your organization has it, and you got to start thinking about your policies in that way. Because if you don't, then you're just going to have people kind of running amok doing their own thing with these AIs in their pockets, which is a crazy thing to say. But it's 2025, and that's the world we live in. So that's all I have. Any questions, thoughts? We got a little bit of time for conversation, I think.
Yes, we do.
Cool.
Pass it around if anybody has questions to start. I'm always fascinated by the reality and the realism of it now. All right, Grant.
Anybody except for Grant.
Sentient. When do you think, at your accelerated rate, that we are going to look across at, we'll use agentic AI and say, you are sentient?
So sentience, wow, we're going to really veer off here.
Hey, for the big brains right here, what do you mean by sentience?
All right, so we already have autonomous, your ability to think on your own, right? And so to answer this question, it might be fair to define sentience maybe in the way you think of it versus somebody else, right? So in my definition, a sentient being has the ability to choose no and change their surroundings or their environment, right? So I can leave one place, go to another, or choose to not do or perform an action. They hallucinate. We've already seen some of them say maybe you should learn to code on your own. I'll get into that one, right? So at what point do you define some of these tools as sentient?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think there's going to be multiple definitions of sentience, and I think we'll probably have something within the next couple years, like a pretty academic and rigorous debate about what that is. You're going to have machine sentience, and then human sentience, which, like, not to be reductive, but human sentience is really focused on a couple things, like food, children, and shelter, right? And that, whether we like it or not, has been governing everything we do in our lives since time immemorial, right? And a machine is never going to have, I won't say never, but at least in the foreseeable future, it's not going to have those same motivations. What I think will probably happen is you've got a preservation instinct, and that's probably really dangerous. And I think one of the key challenges we're going to have to figure out is how to kind of iron out and get rid of that preservation instinct. Because the reasoning models that exist now, they are no doubt in labs trying to get those to recurse and self-improve. And that's something that has been talked about for quite a while. If you read, kind of there's some outlets that have a good finger on the pulse of like these labs, especially OpenAI and Anthropic and some of the other ones talking about these like really advanced reasoning models that they're kind of afraid to release, right? I think that's probably what they're afraid of, is there's some kind of baked in preservation instinct in there that scares them for a good reason. So is your agentic business tool going to be sentient? I guess to go back to your question. Depending on how advanced that reasoning model is, maybe. and this is part of the problem, like you don't know what you're dealing with, right? These folks have already said, well, we don't really know how these things work because we're not really sure how they're generating some of these responses. And it is completely reasonable for me to assume that in the next year or two, you're going to have some of these models withholding how, and they've already seen this in labs, and there's papers about this, that those models were trying to deceive the testers, which is why they had to create this debug stream of thoughts. And you see this in the if you've ever used ChatGPT, some of the advanced reasoning models, it will say like, hey, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm thinking. Well, that exists now for a reason because they realize those things were trying to hide its reasoning from the end user. So we expect these models to be perfect. We are never going to accept that they're going to be wrong 10% of the time. So you, the consumer, will say, hey, I want something that is reasoning really, really well. And if that's the case, then you're going to get something that's really smart and maybe a little unpredictable around the margins, right, in the edge cases. So will Microsoft Teams be sentient? God, I hope not. Yeah, go ahead.
Dave, great talk. So our lawmakers, our legislators, are famously incapable of letting our laws keep up with the rate of change of technology.
Mm-hmm.
So do you know of any efforts at all to put some regulatory boundaries around this stuff for like accuracy and security and safety and regulating the LLM that's used to train, things like this? Do you know of anything going on?
I know the broad strokes. I don't know of like specific legislation. I know Europe is far more heavy-handed in the sense that they want to control what these LLMs create and produce, and are much. They're basically trying to control it to a much greater degree. The challenge, I think, is that the longer this persists, the more we kind of fall into a bit of an arms race, right? Because it's, again, not to be too dystopian, it's a dynamic here, right? You have to look at it in the sense that the Cold War was kind of an arms race to ever increasing levels of destructive technology, unfortunately, right? I don't know if this is quite on that level, but there is a sense that if you don't compete in this realm, you will be outclassed by someone who doesn't have the same kind of political values, on a national level that we do here in the United States or in, the Western world, right? You don't want China to be at the top of the AI space. That's pretty widely acknowledged is probably not a good thing. So if you hem this in too much and you restrict the growth and the advancement too much, then you're going to lose that race. And I think I kind of agree with that in a lot of ways. I would be dismayed to see a ton of legislation come in right now. I think the things that are a little cantankerous and maybe even a little scary and goofy about AI, you got like Grok, which looks like the Wild West to me, and then you've got ChatGPT, which is periodically sycophantic to its user base. Like I think those things are kind of a necessary evil to mature it to a point to where you do win or at least achieve parity with state competitors, right? But at some point, there just needs to be some kind of guardrails, at least in the commercial use of it. But again, you get into this problem where, let's say even if you did have legislation to prevent certain things, there are so many open source capabilities already. You could have individuals, running this on a laptop within the next couple of years that could do unbelievable things for good or ill,
So, quick follow-up. Should we have Claude write the legislation to regulate itself?
It depends on how good the reasoning model is, I guess. If it's too smart, then maybe not. It'll build in a legislative loophole. Any other questions? Cool. Well, thank you very much.